We think we know Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, the symbol of England, an icon of power. But if you were in the same room with her in 1590, you wouldn't sense greatness, but something else, a suffocating smell. It was her greatest secret, her royal scent, a foul cocktail of heavy perfumes, rotting teeth, and the poison she applied to her face every day. This is the story of how the most powerful woman in the world waged a war to hide the decay of her own body. Her appearance was a political instrument. She was an unmarried queen in a man's world, surrounded by enemies. Her face on coins and portraits was a symbol of stability and divine authority. Any flaw, any weakness could be interpreted as a sign of England's vulnerability. Here, Elizabeth utilized the old concept of the king's two bodies. Her physical body could age and fall ill, but her body politic, the state itself, was immortal. Her face was the nation's flag. Any scar on it was a hole from an enemy. Cannonball. We will conduct a historical autopsy of this scent, breaking it down into three key elements. First, the aftermath of an illness that nearly killed her. Second, the deadly poison she considered a cosmetic. And third, a luxurious addiction that literally rotted her mouth. This was the toxic trinity that defined her life: smallpox scars, poisonous lead, and rotting sugar. To understand how Elizabeth reached this state, we must return to the moment her perfect image first cracked. Our story begins in October 1562 at Hampton Court Palace. It was there that the Queen was struck by an invisible and merciless enemy, smallpox. At 29, she was burning with fever, delirious. Her doctors prepared to announce her death. The mortality rate for the disease reached 30%. For her Privy Council, this wasn't just the Queen's illness. It was a national crisis. They were already panicking, discussing who would inherit the throne. But Elizabeth survived, miraculously. However, the victory came at a price. Smallpox left deep, pitted scars on her face. Her face, her primary brand, had become a map of her own mortality. It was a catastrophe. Official portraits continued to lie, depicting a flawless visage. There was even a decree. All depictions of the Queen had to follow an approved, idealized pattern. But at court, everyone saw the truth. The gap between propaganda and reality became state policy. Put yourself in her place. Your face is your main political asset. Every scar on it is an argument for your enemies. In an era when a monarch ruled by divine right, such a flaw was not just a cosmetic defect. It was a sign of God's disfavor, a theological threat to her entire reign. Elizabeth was not going to tolerate it. She chose war. And a weapon for this war was found: Venetian ceruse, the most expensive and desired cosmetic of the era. It promised a perfect aristocratic pallor. It was a thick paste that perfectly concealed any imperfections. Elizabeth began applying it every day. It was the Photoshop of the 16th century, but with a lethal filter. The layer of makeup was so thick that it would crack if she smiled too widely. This forced her to maintain a perpetually regal, impassive expression. This cosmetic had a second, more sinister name: the spirits of Saturn. She had found the perfect solution: a mask to hide her vulnerability. But the Queen did not know that the main ingredient in this magic paste was a slow but certain killer. She thought she was buying salvation, but she was actually renting a tomb. Her salvation was becoming her curse, and it would become the second component of her foul secret. The main component of the ceruse was white lead carbonate, a heavy metal, a neurotoxin. It was mixed with vinegar to form a thick paste. Essentially, the Queen was applying a layer of poisonous paint to her face every day. And here's what's astonishing. This was the same pigment that Titian and other Renaissance masters used to create their immortal masterpieces. Elizabeth literally turned her face into a living yet poisoned painting. The terrible mechanism of this poison lay in its paradox. The lead did indeed tighten the skin, temporarily hiding wrinkles, but it also dried it out, leaving it gray and lifeless. It ate into her pores, causing inflammation and new blemishes. The worse her real skin became, the thicker the layer of ceruse required to hide it. It was a dermatological pyramid scheme. Each new layer of makeup was a payment on the debt created by the layer before, and the interest on that debt grew daily. To slow this process, the makeup was often left on for a week. At a time, literally pickling her skin in lead. But the poison didn't stay on the surface. It slowly seeped through the skin and into her bloodstream, poisoning her from the inside. The symptoms of chronic lead poisoning, or Saturnism as it was then called, are well known. Hair loss, digestive problems, kidney and brain damage, and most notably, severe mood swings. Her legendary temper tantrums and excruciating indecisiveness may not have been mere character traits. They could have been symptoms of the neurotoxic effects of the poison she was applying to her own face. Imagine you are her lady-in-waiting. Every evening you are ordered to wash off this mask, but it has eaten into the skin. It's almost impossible to remove. The ceruse comes off along with flakes of skin. You see the queen's real face, gray, ulcerated, and corroded. And you know that tomorrow morning you will have to cover this horror with poison once again. To remove this crust, even more aggressive concoctions were often used: rosewater, eggshells, and even mercury. Another deadly poison. It was less like removing makeup and more like an archaeological excavation at a toxic site. The lead and vinegar themselves had a sharp chemical smell. Add to that the scent of damaged, inflamed skin beneath the thick layer of paste. Imagine the smell of an artist's studio mixed with that of a hospital ward, sharp, metallic, and vinegary with subtle notes of decay. This was the first layer of her royal scent. But the worst was yet to come. Her face had become a motionless, poisonous mask. She had won the war against her scars, but was losing the war with her body. And while this slow chemical war was being waged on her skin, a biological insurgency was brewing in her mouth, provoked by the most desired and expensive product of the age. That product was sugar. In the 16th century, it cost as much as a narcotic. A pound of sugar was equivalent to a week's wages for a London laborer. It was not a foodstuff. It was an edible gemstone, a symbol of absolute wealth. Elizabeth was addicted. She adored marzipan, candied fruits, and sweet wines. Court banquets would conclude with elaborate sculptures made of sugar paste, which she would eagerly devour. The problem was that oral hygiene was non-existent. There were no toothbrushes. Her sugary diet led to total ruin. The queen's teeth began to rot, blacken, and fall out. In 1597, the French ambassador André de Mace wrote, "Her teeth are yellow and black, which makes it difficult for her to speak." The paradox is that black teeth became a fashion trend. Ladies of the court would intentionally rub their teeth with soot to mimic the look of a sugar mouth and appear wealthier. This was the core of her royal scent, the smell of rotting teeth, inflamed gums, and chronic abscesses. This is not just bad breath, it is the smell of decay occurring inside a living person, a powerful, pervasive stench. The German traveler Paul Hensner, who visited the court in 1598, also noted her black teeth. It was becoming physically difficult to get close to the queen. Let's pause for a second. What is more horrifying, the poison you apply to your face to maintain power, or the addiction that rots you from the inside because you can't give it up? The queen was so afraid of the pain of having a tooth pulled that one of her bishops, John Aylmer, had one of his own healthy teeth extracted in front of her just to encourage her. This illustrates her fear and the primitive state of medicine. She tried to hide this too. She would stuff her cheeks with cotton rags to keep them from looking sunken. She began to speak little, and her words became indistinct. This physically hindered her ability to speak the foreign languages for which she was once famous. Her renowned polyglottism became a casualty of her addiction. She was forced to sacrifice one of her key political talents. So, we have the smell of poison from her face and the smell of rot from her mouth. How to overpower this nightmarish duet? Elizabeth unleashed a true aromatic war, using the most powerful weapons of her time. In each of her palaces there was a special room, essentially a perfume laboratory, where floral waters were distilled and heavy scents were created around the clock. This was her personal arsenal in this war. But this arsenal wasn't just for masking the smell, it was for survival. We forget that the 16th century was an era of overwhelming stench. Cities choked on filth. Hygiene was non-existent. In this world, smells were not just pleasant or unpleasant, they were deadly. The miasma theory of disease was dominant at the time. It was believed that the plague and other illnesses were transmitted through bad air, through miasmas. A pleasant scent was not a luxury, it was a form of defense. Perfume was not just a cosmetic but a kind of olfactory shield, a form of 16th century PPE. And Elizabeth used the heaviest weapons in this arsenal. She was obsessed with animalic scents, musk, ambergris, and civet. Her dresses, gloves, and furniture, everything was saturated with these thick, suffocating scents. Their origins were repulsive. Musk was obtained from the glands of the male musk deer, civet from the anal glands of the civet cat. Ambergris was a product of the sperm whale's digestive system. She didn't want a smell of flowers, but of power. And in the 16th century, power smelled animalic. Her main accessory was the pomander. This was a metal sphere, often made of gold and precious stones, filled with an aromatic paste. The name itself comes from the French pomme d'ambre, meaning apple of amber. She constantly held it in her hands or near her face. It was her personal, portable air purifier. It created a barrier between her and the stench of the streets, the courtiers, and her own breath. Another layer of deception, this time made of gold and incense. Now, put it all together. This was the true royal scent. Imagine approaching her. First, you are hit by a heavy, almost deafening wave of musk and floral oils. But underneath it, you sense something else. The faint chemical smell of lead from her skin. And cutting through it all, the nauseating Swedish smell of rot from her mouth. It was an olfactory civil war. The suffocating sweetness of the perfume waged a desperate battle against the grim reality of chemical and biological decay, and all the courtiers were caught in the crossfire. Her entire life, she built this complex system of deception, an aromatic fortress to hide the ruins of her body. But the enemy had long been inside the walls. Her fall was inevitable, and when her body finally failed, this construction of poison, sugar, and lies collapsed with it. In her final days, she refused to lie down. She stood, day after day, leaning on cushions. She feared that if she lay down, she would never get up again. It was a final act of defiance. Her doctors were forbidden to examine her. Her courtier, Sir Robert Cecil, later wrote that the layer of makeup on her face was an inch thick, and in her chambers she ordered all the mirrors removed. The queen who had built an empire on her image could no longer bear her own reflection. But this foul story is not just a historical anecdote. It's a protocol for survival and for failure. It remains relevant today. First, it's a lesson about the trap of escalation. A small lie to hide a scar requires a bigger lie, a thicker layer of poison, until the entire system collapses under its own weight. Second, it's the eternal battle between the external and the internal. You can polish the facade endlessly, but if the foundation, your health, is rotting, the whole building is doomed. And third, it's the illusion of control. Elizabeth commanded an empire, but she could not control the simple biochemistry of her own body. And this isn't just a story about her, it's a story about us. The trap of escalation is our social media filters, where each new picture must be better than the last. The battle between the external and the internal is our obsession with appearance at the expense of mental and physical health. And the illusion of control is our belief that we can manage our digital image while ignoring the real problems behind the scenes. The secret of her royal scent is a story of how the pressure and thirst for power drive us to self-destruction. Elizabeth built a great England, but her most important battle was lost. In the mirror she feared, and in the body she betrayed. All her life she created the image of the Virgin Queen, eternal, incorruptible, divine. But the very means she used to build this myth of immortality only accelerated her physical decay. This is the greatest paradox of her reign. This choice is not just historical. It's about us. What is more terrifying today? A clear, known risk we take to achieve a goal. Let's call it poison, or a slow, sweet addiction that destroys us unnoticed. Let's call it sugar. Write just one word in the comments, poison or sugar. Let's see what scares us more.